Picture a Tuesday evening in October. The kind of evening where nothing is supposed to happen, where the sky turns the color of old bruises just before dark, and people are driving home from work, thinking about dinner, thinking about nothing in particular. In a small town in Ohio, in the autumn of 1987, that kind of evening ended with a woman dead in her apartment, and a question that would destroy an innocent man's life for the next 23 years. Her name was Patricia Moore. She was 34 years old. She worked at a local printing company. She loved crossword puzzles, and she had a small window box of geraniums that she watered every morning without fail. On that October night, she was strangled to death inside her own home. No forced entry, no clear motive, and in a town of 4,000 people. The police needed an answer fast. They found their answer in the wrong man. Calvin Elliott was 26 years old. He worked the early shift at a factory on the edge of town. He was quiet, reliable, the kind of man his co-workers described as easy to be around. He had briefly dated Patricia Moore 2 years before her death. It had ended without drama, without bitterness. Two people who simply moved on, but briefly dated the victim, was enough to put Calvin's name at the top of the list. He had no alibi for that Tuesday night. He had been home alone, watching television, the same way millions of ordinary people spend their evenings, without witnesses, without proof, without any reason to think they would ever need one. The investigation moved quickly, perhaps too quickly. There was no physical evidence linking Calvin to the crime scene. No fingerprints, no blood, nothing that modern science would today consider meaningful. What there was a neighbor who claimed she had seen a man matching Calvin's description leaving the building that night. What there was a forensic expert who testified that fibers from Calvin's jacket were consistent with fibers found at the scene. And what there was, most damaging of all, was a fellow inmate who told the court that Calvin had confessed to him while awaiting trial. 3 witnesses, 3 pieces of what looked like evidence, and a public defender who had less than 2 weeks to prepare a defense for a man facing life in prison. The trial lasted 9 days. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Then they came back into that courtroom, and they looked at Calvin Elliott, a 26-year-old factory worker in a borrowed suit, and they said the word that would take everything from him. Guilty. Life imprisonment. No possibility of parole for 30 years. Calvin's mother collapsed in the courtroom. His daughter, just 3 years old, too young to understand what was happening, was taken home by a relative, and Calvin Elliott was led away through a door that would not open from the inside for the next 2 decades. He said 3 words as they took him out. I didn't do it. Nobody believed him. There is a particular kind of suffering that comes not from violence or illness, but from the absolute certainty that the world has made a terrible mistake and that no one is listening. Calvin Elliott lived inside that suffering for 23 years. He ate the same meals from the same plastic trays. He watched seasons change through a window the size of a book. He wrote letters to journalists, to lawyers, to anyone who might listen, and he watched most of them go unanswered. He filed appeal after appeal, learning law from textbooks borrowed from the prison library, teaching himself the language of courts and motions and precedents, because no one else was going to do it for him. His mother visited every month for the first 8 years. Then her health declined. Then she stopped being able to make the journey. She died in 2001, while Calvin was still behind bars. He was not permitted to attend her funeral. He sat in his cell on the day of her burial and held a photograph of her that had faded from being handled so many times. His daughter grew up without him. She learned to walk without him. She started school, had her first heartbreak, graduated. All of it in the world outside, all of it in photographs sent twice a year, all of it without her father. In 2003, Calvin wrote to the Innocence Project, an organization dedicated to reviewing cases of wrongful conviction. They added him to a waiting list of over 3,000 cases. He went back to waiting. The world changed around him. The internet arrived, then smartphones, then a whole new century. Wars started and ended. The country elected its first black president. And Calvin Elliott remained in cell Block D of Millbrook Correctional Facility, still maintaining his innocence to anyone who would listen, still filing motions that went nowhere, still waiting for someone to look closely enough at the truth In the autumn of 2009, a 22-year-old law student named Meredith Clark was searching for a thesis topic. Her professor suggested wrongful conviction cases, specifically cases where forensic evidence had been challenged. She spent 3 weeks working through old trial transcripts. She almost missed Calvin's file entirely. It was buried under 20 years of rejected appeals, faded ink, yellowing paper. But she read it, and something immediately stood out. The forensic expert who had testified at Calvin's trial, a man named Dr. Harold Webb, had since retired. And in 2005, Dr. Webb had been the subject of a professional misconduct investigation in another state. Meredith followed that thread. She discovered that Dr. Webb had testified in 47 criminal trials across 3 states over the course of his career. In 6 of those cases, his forensic analysis had later been found to be scientifically unreliable. 6 cases, 6 human beings whose convictions rested, at least in part, on evidence that didn't hold up to scrutiny. Meredith brought her findings to her professor. Her professor brought them to a civil rights attorney named James Okafor. And James Okafor, who had spent 30 years watching the justice system fail the people it was supposed to protect, agreed to take Calvin's case without charge. The legal battle that followed took 3 years. The state resisted every motion. The original prosecution insisted the conviction was sound. Bureaucratic obstacles appeared at every turn. Lost records, procedural delays, hearings that were scheduled and then postponed again. But James Okafor had seen this before. He kept going. Finally, in the spring of 2012, 24 years after Calvin's arrest, a judge agreed to allow DNA testing on the original evidence from Patricia Moore's apartment, evidence that had been collected in 1987 and stored in a box ever since, evidence that could now be analyzed using technology that didn't exist when Calvin was convicted, technology that could tell you, with absolute scientific certainty, who had been present at a crime scene. The testing took 4 months. Calvin waited. He had been waiting most of his adult life. For more months was nothing. For more months was everything. The results came back on a Wednesday morning in November 2012. Calvin was sitting in a meeting room at the prison when his attorney called. He had asked the guard to let him know when the call came. He had barely slept the night before. James Okafor's voice on the other end of the line was quiet and careful, the way people speak when they are carrying something enormous. He said, "Calvin, the DNA on Patricia's clothing does not match you." He said, "It matches a man named Gerald Pruitt. He lived in Patricia's building in 1987. He moved to Arizona 6 months after murder. He has never once been investigated for this crime." He said, "Calvin, you're going to go home." Calvin put the phone down. He put his head on the table in front of him, and for the first time in 23 years, he wept, not from sorrow, but from the sheer, overwhelming relief of being believed. On the 17th of February, 2013, Calvin Elliott walked out of Millbrook Correctional Facility into a gray winter morning. He was 49 years old. He had entered those gates at 26. His daughter was waiting in the car park. She had driven 6 hours overnight to be there. She was 26 herself now, the same age her father had been when they took him away. They stood in that car park for a long time, just holding on to each other, saying nothing. There was nothing to say that the silence didn't already contain. But freedom, it turned out, was more complicated than a single morning. Calvin had no employment history for 23 years, no credit rating, no experience with smartphones or the internet or the dozens of ordinary tasks that had been transformed by technology while he was locked away. He had to learn how to use a touchscreen at the age of 49. He had to learn how to navigate a world that had moved on entirely without him. The state of Ohio offered him compensation of $52,000. That is roughly $6.20 for every single day he spent in prison for a crime he did not commit. Gerald Pruitt was arrested in Arizona in March 2013. Confronted with the DNA evidence, he confessed within 48 hours. He was convicted of Patricia Moore's murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. But here's the part of the story that is harder to sit with. Dr. Harold Webb, the forensic expert whose questionable analysis had helped combat Calvin, was never criminally charged. The detectives who had rushed to judgment were never disciplined. The jailhouse informant who had lied under oath, who had looked a jury in the eye and told a man confessed to a murder he didn't commit, was never re-prosecuted for perjury. The system that had imprisoned an innocent man for 23 years faced almost no consequences. Calvin Elliott had paid with his life. The system paid with nothing. Calvin's story is extraordinary, but the terrible truth is that it is not rare. According to the National Registry of Exonerations, more than 3,400 people in the United States have been formally exonerated after wrongful conviction since 1989. The average time served before exoneration is more than 9 years. The leading causes are eyewitness misidentification, false testimony from informants, and flawed forensic science. The same three factors that put Calvin Elliott in prison. Eyewitness testimony remains one of the most trusted forms of evidence in courtrooms across the Western world. And yet decades of psychological research have shown that human memory, particularly under stress, particularly as strangers, particularly in low-light conditions, is profoundly unreliable. The neighbor who testified against Calvin had seen him once before from across a poorly lit car park at night in the immediate aftermath of a traumatic discovery. She was not lying. She was mistaken. And the difference between those two things cost a man 23 years. Calvin Elliott is 60 years old today. He volunteers at a legal aid clinic in Cleveland, Ohio, where he helps other prisoners understand their rights, draft appeals, navigate a system that was not designed to be navigated by people without resources or education or time. He does not describe himself as bitter. He says that bitterness would mean the system had taken something else from him, something he wasn't willing to give. He keeps a photograph of his mother on the desk where he works. The same photograph, faded and soft at the edges, that he held in his cell on the day of her funeral. He has never asked for an apology from the state of Ohio. He knows he won't receive one. He has simply decided to spend whatever time he has left doing something useful with what happened to him, to make sure that the next Calvin Elliott, whoever they are, wherever they are, has someone in their corner a little sooner. Every justice system in the world is built on a principle that sounds simple, that it is better for 10 guilty men to go free than for one innocent man to suffer. And yet, again and again, the evidence tells us that innocent people are suffering in cells across America, across the United Kingdom, across the entire English-speaking world. Right now, tonight, as you watch this, some of them will be exonerated. Some of them will die in prison still maintaining their innocence. And we will never know which is which until someone looks closely enough. Calvin Elliott was lucky, if you can call losing 23 years of your life lucky. He was lucky because a young law student decided to look closely. The question this story leaves with me, and I hope it leaves with you, is a simple one. Who is looking for the others?